All right, everyone. So final chapter of the semester. This is chapter 19. This is mental practice. Again, I wanted to be kind to you guys on this last chapter, so I'm hoping this information will kind of give you some quick summaries. Try to keep the quiz really brief for you on the last quiz. I believe I only did 10 questions as I did for chapter 10. So just follow along quickly and we'll rip through chapter 19 so we can finish up here. So moving to the discussion, if we look at motor skill learning and performance literature, the term mental practice refers to cognitive rehearsal of a physical skill in the absence of physical movement. So it's just you sitting there, maybe you have your eyes closed, maybe it's open, but you're just picturing yourself doing that particular skill. There's two roles for mental practice. The first one is the acquisition of motor skills. So it allows you to picture yourself doing it so that if you're trying to learn a new skill, at least you have a good understanding of how to do that. And the other component is addressing how mental practice can help in performance preparation. So again, like if you watch skiing competitively, you'll see someone at the top of the hill, they're rehearsing how they go through the different turns. And so that is a great way of improving performance preparation. So mental practice does aid skill acquisition. And so a lot of the literature has shown that physical practice is better than other conditions, but when you add mental practice, it's typically better than no practice. So this finding is important because it demonstrates the effectiveness of mental practice in aiding skill acquisition, and even more impresses the effect of using a combination of physical and mental practice. So mental practice, better than no practice. Obviously, physical practice is the most important. But when you start combining mental and physical, you start to see some greater improvements. So again, if we kind of went through some of these graphics, you would see that, but you guys get the point of what we're trying to go through here. Next is the mental practice benefits in rehab settings. So in addition to being beneficial for acquiring new skills, mental practice can be effective in rehab contexts for relearning. So let's say reacquiring walking or reusing your arm. So mental practice is actually becoming increasingly popular as a therapeutic tool because it has several advantages relative to physical practice. So an example of that is it enables intervention to be very early in the recovery process with little to no movement might be possible. So if you have someone who has a stroke and they literally cannot move their arm, you might be like, hey, I want you to picture doing that. I want you to picture yourself lifting your arm up. I want you to picture stuff doing things with your arm. That's actually something we learn in school relatively early on, and it is important. So we get people to actually do some, mental imagery training by watching themselves do those particular things in their head. Next is showing some of the research here. So research in functional skill rehab shows that there's a benefit of mental practice, especially in the form of visual and kinesthetic imagery along with physical practice. So, it's great in early rehab, but we also kind of say, hey, if we can get you physically practicing something while you're actually visually trying to think about it, or while we're trying to physically move you like kinesthetically, I'm trying to tactilely bring you into that position, that can also be really helpful to people as well in combination. So again, using mental practice in a physical therapy treatment program, this is again kind of using this neurodevelopmental treatment method, which is not super well supported in the research, but it is a method nonetheless. So you're just basically getting people to do some mental practice of a skill, and then you are applying it into the physical context and the physical movements of what they need to be able to do. Moving on. Mental practice as a part of a general preparation strategy that aids learning. So we see an interesting example of incorporating mental practice into a practice routine in a 5-step general learning strategy, which was originally proposed by Singer in 1986 and 88. The strategy involved elements of mental practice in 3 of the steps. So the first step is to get ready physically, mentally, and emotionally. The second step involves mentally imaging performing the action, both visually and kinesthetically. And the third step involves concentrating on only one relevant cue related to the action, such as the seams of a tennis ball. The fourth step is to execute the action, and the fifth step is to evaluate the performance outcome. So the first three parts are the mental practice part, right? Get ready mentally, emotionally, physically. Image yourself, like imagine yourself doing it. So mental imaging. Third step, concentrating on only one component of that in your mental image. So if you're playing tennis, seams of the tennis ball. If you're playing basketball, seams on the basketball. If you're playing golf, a dimple on the golf ball, something very specific. And then you go execute the skill. And then you reevaluate and be like, what did I do there? You know, how can I do that as better the next time for preparation? So next is, why is mental practice effective? So there's a neuromuscular hypothesis. So when you use mental practice, you create this connection between the nerves and the muscles that are associated with that skill. So that kind of activates that neuromotor pathway. They'll be activated when the person performs the skill, and that helps kind of strengthen that component a little bit more. Next is the brain activity hypothesis. So brain imaging studies have shown that when a person imagines moving a limb, brain activity is similar to when the person actually physically moves it. So with a neuromuscular hypothesis, the brain activity hypothesis proposes that mental practice, especially in the form of imagery, is effective because of the neurophysiological similarities between the imagined and the actual movements. So the idea is that the imagined and actual movements have similar neurophysiological bases is referred to as the functional equivalence hypothesis. So you might want to know that part. Next is the cognitive hypothesis. So mental practice can provide the person answers to many performance-related questions without the pressure that accompanies physical performance of the skill. In the later stages of learning, mental practice can be beneficial in assisting the person to consolidate strategies as well as to correct errors. So if you're able to kind of mentally assess what's going on, again, you don't have to pay the consequences of making the error in the situation. You can kind of imagine as things are happening what you can be doing to mitigate some of those components. And then we have mental practice and imagery ability. So there is evidence indicating that the effectiveness of the use of imagery as a form of mental practice is related to a person's imagery ability, which is the ability to make an image an action when requested to do so. So people have great difficulty imaging a described action, whereas others can image with a high degree of vividness and control. So this varies from person to person, but we can use an outcome measure like your movement imagery questionnaire to test your imagery ability and assess if you're really good at doing that or not. So this is an important component and something that you kind of have to practice a little bit in order to get good at being able to make that vivid image in your brain. Also, because imagery ability is an individual difference variable, so it's different between each person and unique, it's proposed that imagery ability influences the success of mental practice. People with high level of imagery ability will typically more quickly benefit from mental practice of motor skills than those with low level imagery ability. But again, because our brain is plastic, because we have the ability to change, we can improve this by practicing it as well. So here's some MIQ items, right? Again, these are not really things that you necessarily need to know, but it kind of gives you an idea of just saying like, okay, where can I picture, like, how do I score this? Oh, this is really easy, or, oh, this is really hard to feel, and some of it is just visual. So can I visualize something? And then while I'm visualizing, while I'm sitting there, can I feel it, right? Like, can I feel the ball in my hand? Can I feel the bat in my hand? Can I feel the ground underneath my feet, even as I just picture it in my mind? And so that would kind of be going to that movement imagery questionnaire items. But that kind of encompasses that mental imagery component. I want it to be really short here so you guys could get through this part. I want you guys to obviously focus on, the highlighted components here. I really only highlighted the things that are going to be relevant to your quiz, as I did in Chapter 10. So please come back to this. Please go back through, look at some of these highlighted components and kind of just understand what you need to focus on. But that is the end of chapter 19, and that is the end of the online content for KNES 210 for this semester. So next up is obviously completing all your quizzes, completing your Unit 6 chapter review, and then we're moving on to final presentations. So just be aware that those presentations are due at the end of March here, and we want to make sure that you are well equipped to meet that deadline. So don't be afraid to reach out and ask me any questions if you do have anything, and we'll have time in class to discuss things as well. So please feel free to reach out when you need to. Thank you guys again for listening to my boring voice over these boring slides for the last 3 to 4 months. I really do appreciate you guys putting in the effort that you have been. It's been reflecting pretty well on quizzes for the majority of you. And so keep up the great work for the final project, and we'll see you very shortly in class for those.